They mocked the widow's old uniform, until a general recognized the badge. The widow stood quietly at the edge of the military ceremony, clutching an old, carefully folded uniform against her chest. Its fabric was faded, its buttons dulled by time, and a few loose threads hung from the sleeves. People glanced at her, then looked away with amused smiles. A few whispered that she must have mistaken the event for a charity gathering. One even laughed, wondering why anyone would bring an antique costume to a celebration of modern heroes. She lowered her eyes, but she didn't leave. She had made a promise years ago, and she intended to keep it. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. She had been married to Sergeant Daniel Mercer for 27 years. He had never spoken much about his service, only that true courage rarely came with applause. After he passed away, she discovered a small handwritten note tucked inside the uniform's inner pocket. If they ever ask who I was, don't tell them. Show them this. She never understood what he meant. The annual military remembrance ceremony seemed like the right place. Maybe someone would recognize the name. Maybe someone would finally explain the silence her husband had carried for decades. Instead, strangers stared. Children pointed. Even a few veterans exchanged puzzled looks, unable to identify the unfamiliar insignia stitched near the shoulder. The widow tightened her grip on the uniform. Perhaps she had misunderstood everything. Then a convoy rolled into the square. The crowd straightened as a decorated four-star general stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed. Officials hurried to greet him. His prepared speech lasted only a minute. Then his eyes drifted across the audience. They stopped. The expression on his face changed instantly. Without another word, he stepped off the stage and walked directly toward the widow. The murmurs spread like ripples through the crowd. No one understood why one of the nation's highest-ranking officers would leave an official ceremony for an elderly woman holding an old jacket. When he finally stood before her, he didn't speak. He simply stared at the faded badge. His hands began to tremble. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the general stood at full attention and delivered the sharpest salute anyone there had ever seen. Complete silence swallowed the square. The widow blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Did you know my husband?" The general swallowed hard before answering. "I owe him my life." The crowd leaned closer. Decades earlier, during a classified rescue operation deep behind enemy lines, the general had been nothing more than a frightened young lieutenant. Their unit had become trapped under relentless fire, with no escape and no hope. Daniel Mercer had volunteered for the impossible. While everyone else retreated, he charged back into danger alone. He carried wounded soldiers one by one through smoke, collapsing buildings, and flying debris until every last survivor had escaped. The final rescue cost him nearly everything. When the dust settled, the official reports praised the mission, but the details remained classified. Daniel never received a public ceremony. He never asked for one. The only visible reminder was the unusual badge now stitched onto the old uniform. The widow's eyes filled with tears. "So, he never told me." "He wouldn't," the general replied softly. "Heroes like him almost never do." He turned toward the audience. His voice carried across the silent square. "Today we celebrate service. But service isn't measured by medals people can see. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are hidden for decades, waiting for someone willing to remember." He removed one of his own ceremonial medals. Gasps swept through the crowd. Protocol forbade such gestures. But sometimes honoring the truth mattered more than tradition. The general carefully pinned the medal beside Daniel Mercer's forgotten badge. One by one, veterans across the audience rose to their feet. Without a single command, they saluted. The applause didn't begin immediately. First came tears, then quiet nods, then thunder. It rolled through the square like a wave, louder than any military band could have played. The widow held the uniform close once more. This time, no one saw old fabric. They saw sacrifice. They saw loyalty. They saw a promise finally fulfilled. As the ceremony ended, strangers approached not with laughter, but with gratitude. Young soldiers asked to hear Daniel's story. Children thanked the widow for bringing the uniform. Even those who had mocked her moments before lowered their heads in quiet apology. She smiled through her tears, not because the world finally knew her husband's name, but because his character had remained exactly what he wanted it to be: quiet, faithful, unshakable. Because true honor is never measured by recognition, it lives forever in the lives it saves. And as the evening sun settled over the weathered uniform, the forgotten badge no longer looked faded at all. It shone brightest in the hearts that had finally learned what it truly meant. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like these remind us that courage often walks unnoticed until kindness gives it a voice. And if you believe the greatest heroes are sometimes the quietest ones, subscribe for more unforgettable stories that deserve to be remembered.